The next order of business is going to be about, the topic is minimum wage increases and its effect on the working poor. And before we start, I want to say this, that today we invited ones that we knew that were for the minimum wage change. And then at our next meeting, we want to invite some that may be against it. Did not want to have a big debate in here today, so we want to make it equal and not lopsided in any kind of way, so we want to invite both sides. So with that being said, our first person to speak, we're going to have Mr. Joe Wise. Can you get up and state your name, and we want to talk about minimum wages.
Thank you for the opportunity to allow me to bring forth this issue to the council today. As we know that at the state legislature, they brought forth a bill this year, House Bill 1, to increase the minimum wage in Kentucky to $10.10 an hour by 2016, which is in line with what President Obama would like to do nationally by 2016. I am, again, Joe Wise with the Greater Louisville Building and Construction Trades Council, and I represent an organization of 15 building and construction trades unions that collectively represent approximately 11,000 workers in Greater Louisville. Our workers work under organized collective bargaining wages, but we are a supporter of the minimum wage. And if you look at the history of the minimum wage, in 1967, the minimum wage was $1.40. In 1974, and I remember this because I was working for the minimum wage in 1974, it was $1.65. And today it is $7.25. If you just adjust the rate of inflation from what was being paid in 1967 to today, the minimum wage would be $10.74 an hour, just adjusting for the minimum wage. Now, a lot of people want to make the argument that we should not adjust the minimum wage for inflation, but if you were to make that same argument for Social Security, I believe you would have an uproar in this country. So if it's all right to increase minimum wage for the people drawing Social Security, I think we should be increasing the minimum wage at least with the rate of inflation from 1967 for the folks that are working at the lower level. If you also look at people today who are making $7.25 an hour, if they work 40 hours a week, they are only making $15,080 per year. Now, they did a survey to see where a family could rent a two-bedroom apartment and still pay for their bills anywhere in the United States, and they found out that there was not one state in this United States where a person making $7.25 an hour could rent a two-bedroom apartment and raise a family on. It is below the poverty level. And the $10.10 would raise them up above the poverty level, but still, they would still be struggling to make ends meet. Another thing that I'd like to bring forward about the minimum wage. If you look at the folks that are being paid the minimum wage, male versus female, 64% of the people earning the minimum wage are females. So females are being discriminated against disproportionately with the minimum wage. Conversely, if you look at the number of women that are holding CEO positions in this country, that's 4%. So there is a bias when it comes to women, when it comes to paying the minimum wage and the wages that they earn here in the United States. Those are just some of the things that I'd like to that I want to bring forth right now. I'm going to let my colleagues get up and make some more statements, but I will be available for questions and comments after my colleagues make their statements. Thank you.
Okay, so you want to wait until they're finished before you make, okay, that's fine. So the next, who's the next one up? Okay. You want to state your name for the clerk?
Bill Londrigan.
Okay.
Sometimes I get my name changed, but
Oh,
that's
it's
okay.
Bill.
I've been called worse before. I've been called Jim. Let me, okay. That's a great name, actually. Let me just say thank you so much for having us today to talk about a very, very important subject, and thank you, the rest of the aldermen here, Alderman Metro Council members. See how old I am? Thank you for taking up this really important subject that's on the front burner right now across the country as well as in Frankfort. And you all know that in Frankfort we have House Bill 1, which passed the Kentucky House already. And it raises the minimum wage up to $10.10 an hour after 3 years. And I think that's an important thing to folks to understand, is that the minimum wage that we have in House Bill 1 is stair-stepped. So it's not an immediate raise to $10.10. In fact, it doesn't go to $10.10 until 2016, July 1, 2016. Initially, it'll raise 95 cents on July 1, another 95 cents increment, and then another 95 cents increment. So after 3 years, it'll get to $10.10. So that's the key elements of the House Bill 1 that's been passed to the Kentucky House. Also in that bill, it has the gender equity language to make sure that women workers are being paid the same as male workers for the same work. That was a separate bill that is now incorporated into House Bill 1. In addition to that, you have some mechanism to try to make sure that small businesses aren't necessarily unduly burdened by an increase in the minimum wage, where they have language in there that says that a small business that has revenue of less than $500,000 per year will not be required to increase the minimum wage under the bill that they have. So that's what's before us right now, and of course this is a national issue, as I mentioned, and you know, we've been looking at the statistics, and Joe mentioned a few of them about who this affects, and really, you know, some of the information that's been put out about just, you know, teenagers and entry-level jobs making minimum wages completely false. You know, we have 89% of the workers are at least 20 years old. 41% have post-secondary education. As Joe mentioned, 57% are women, and 57% of these are working full-time. This is, you know, a varied group of people, and they're all struggling to make a living under what Joe has described already as a poverty-level wage. And we know that the two most important things that we can do to lift people out of poverty has been the Earned Income Tax Credit and an increase in the minimum wage. So we're here to try and make people understand that this is all about lifting people up, giving them a better quality of life, and alleviating poverty for millions of people across the country. The statistics are really startling when you look at them. How many people this will affect when the minimum wage goes into effect is 27 million workers in this country will benefit from the increase in the minimum wage. That is a huge amount of folks. In Kentucky, excuse me, in Kentucky as well, 27% of Kentucky workers would have an increase in the minimum wage, which would result in more than $800 million in additional spending for workers. Our economy is driven by consumer spending. This allows more people to have more money in their pockets so they can spend at the local grocery store. Those are positive impacts that will result from increasing the minimum wage, where workers have more money and the economy will be able to grow at a greater pace. I'm not finding the exact figure for how it would increase in the national economy, it would increase spending by $32 billion. Our economy being driven by consumer spending will result in more job opportunities and more work for folks. We've heard just recently from the CBO report that this minimum wage increase will envision 500,000 jobs being lost. I got to tell you, that figure and that that flies in the face of the economic studies that have been going on for the last decade, beginning with the Card-Kruger study in 1994 that compared New Jersey's increase in the minimum wage to Pennsylvania, where they didn't increase the minimum wage and saw no discernible impact on employment. And those studies have increased, and this is in fact one of the most studied economic issues in the country. And just a month or so ago, 600 economists, including seven Nobel Prize winners, sent a letter to President Obama supporting the increase in the minimum wage and refuting the notion that this is going to cost large numbers of jobs. So this is about people making a better standard of living, of having a better job opportunity, about lifting them out of poverty, about giving children a better quality of life. It's really an issue that I think that is extremely important for the country. The last minimum wage increase went into effect in 2009, which was actually passed in 2006. It was another stair-stepped implementation. So several years have passed since we've been raising the minimum wage. More people in this country have gone into poverty. In Kentucky, in 2001, 26% of our population were considered in poverty. In 10 years, that number increased to 33%. 33% of the citizens of the Commonwealth of Kentucky are living in poverty. The impact of an increase in the minimum wage will lift large numbers of people out of poverty and give them an opportunity to raise their children in an environment that is conducive to having a good education and to have food on the table. So this issue to us is one of a moral issue, an issue that is extremely important to our economy and to the lives of the people that we represent. So we really think that this is something that needs to be done, and we're going to continue working in Frankfurt to try and make sure that the minimum wage increase is passed. And we appreciate your willingness to listen and participate in this discussion. And if y'all have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Councilman Benson.
Bill,
Yes,
poverty is, if you make $20,000, you're not in poverty anymore?
Well, it depends on how many children you have, how many people in a household. That's how they measure the poverty rate.
If you're just single, you make $20,000 a year, would you still be
No,
there?
you're above the poverty level as a single person making $20,000. The statistics are related to families in poverty. So if you've got a family of two and they're making $17,500 a year on the minimum wage, they are below the poverty level.
Well, with 27,000 people on minimum wage now, 27 million.
Yeah.
Are most of those, is that what we would have, 27 million people who would always, that would be the best they can do? A lot of, I taught school for 28 years. I used to be a tool and die maker and put kids on jobs. And a lot of, I put over 500 kids in jobs. And I'd have employers who would call me up and say, hey, I want a student. And at the time, I think the minimum wage was $5.50. Mm-hmm. And I had one employer one time, he said, I'm going to pay him $8. I said, please don't. Please don't. I said, I wish you'd hire this kid and as every 6 months would give him 50 cents until he got the $8, because when he scraps that big job, it maybe cost you $20,000 because he scrapped it. You might say you're fired. Because see, the boss is paying the person to learn. When you go to U of L or UK or something, mm-hmm. You're paying them to teach you, hopefully that when you graduate, that you can go find a job. But when a person's an apprentice, and when he graduates, apprenticeship in tool and die is worth $125,000. So when they graduate, they don't pay the $120,000. It's already been paid for, and they go from apprentice to a journeyman. And so a person learning to do a job, it really kind of hurt me at times that when they said, gosh, to train this kid, I don't know if I can pay this much money and train him. And so that was always somewhat of an issue of trying to make sure that you get a person. See, I think our school system has done a real poor job. You go to school for one reason. Some people think it's a learning. No, it's not. It's to get a job. If you can't get a job, we didn't help society get everybody in the market so that they can be useful. And so, this is a big issue to help our community move farther. To do jobs in our community, there is a lot of skilled labor, jobs available, but we don't have anybody to fill them. I mean, I'm 65 years old, and I can take my tools. I mean, in 1995, I worked for Ford Motor Company as a tool and die maker. They paid me $25 an hour. That's 19 years ago. Maybe minimum wage should be $25 now. I don't know. I mean, that's a long time ago, and I think I wouldn't work for 25 bucks an hour again. Now, I don't want to hurt anybody, but I'm not any smarter than anybody else, but I've got a skill, and I can make a person money. I mean, the only unskilled, I'm a good tool maker. I might not be a good councilman, but I'm a good tool maker, and I can make money, and I can make a boss money. And that's why they pay you a salary, because you can make them money. And that's really, as we're working through to try to make sure we're helping out.
Exactly, and I don't disagree with anything you said about folks, wanting to get a good living through their training and such. What we have here, though, is a whole class of folks that are, been relegated to low-wage jobs that don't really have skills and training, and they're just making it, and many of them, I might add, are on public assistance. Those folks that are making minimum wage, that are working for McDonald's or these large corporations that are making lots of money, and now a lot of their workers are eligible for public assistance. So in a sense, we're also subsidizing those employers for the workers that are not being paid adequately. So we think that increasing the minimum wage, a lot of these folks will actually, not be eligible for public assistance. They'd be actually making a wage that they can, live on, at least at some level.
Thank you. Councilwoman Warridge.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and I'm glad you're having this. I'm not on this committee, however, I'm glad Dr. Shanklin, Community Affairs, have brought these folk here. Let's talk about minimum wage. And what I'd like to know, and I don't know if anyone can answer, some cities, in fact, have raised their minimum wage. Now, we have House Bill 1. I don't know exactly where we are with that at this particular time, but is it anyone here that can speak to how other cities can raise their minimum wage and wages?
Well, not specifically, although there's a similar or corollary is that some of the states themselves have raised the minimum wage over and above what the federal minimum wage is. In fact, in Kentucky in 2006, we raised the minimum wage before the federal government did here in Kentucky. So, again, we're not waiting or trying not to wait for the federal government to pass the minimum wage bill. The state has moved forward to try and pass it here. But I can see that municipalities have the opportunity, if they so desire, to consider raising their minimum wage. Seattle, Washington, I believe you're referring to, they raised their minimum wage to $15.50 an hour, if I'm not mistaken. Of course, a big, to-do. What was it? Yeah, so there have been, examples where that's occurred, and in Seattle, like I say, $15.50, they raised theirs to, I believe that's the number.
Madam Chair, I'd like to request that we look into raising the minimum wage here. We're the largest city in Jefferson County, and I would like to see us raise the minimum wage to a living wage, because I think what I heard you say, Mr. Londrigan, we're supporting, and I've heard it said so many times before, corporate welfare is what we're doing when folk do not pay the people or give them the hours that they need to make a living wage. And I don't think anybody should really support corporate welfare. So I would definitely like to see us move this ball a little bit further, because even when House Bill 1 passes, 3 years from now, we're almost back to where we are now. And I struggle with that. And the other part of that, we eat out quite often, my husband and I. And seemingly, I don't know, I heard some servers saying on Sunday, this minimum wage, there's two different minimum wages. Can we talk about that briefly for restaurant workers, hotel workers, or whoever?
Tipped employees is the way it's referred to. Yes, and House Bill 191, I think it was that number, and that bill also passed out of the House to increase the tipped wage for the tipped minimum wage for the tipped employees as well. And that bill envisions the tip wage going up to 70% of the $10.10 actual minimum wage.
Can you speak to what it is today as we're having this meeting?
I think it's $2.13 an hour.
That is unreal. That is unheard of. that's
So, yeah, so-
editorial I'm making.
So there's two bills, as you mentioned, and both of them had passed the House, and we're still trying to see if we can get them heard in the Kentucky Senate. And as I mentioned, in 2006, we did pass a minimum wage increase to $7.25 prior to the federal government doing it. So there's always a possibility that we could pass it in the Kentucky House and into the Senate.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, President King.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The 213 obviously seems very low, but I've spent a little time talking to servers from time to time in restaurants about that, and a lot of them make a lot of money, with tips. Sure. So the 213 is kind of irrelevant to them, although it's I'm sure that some struggle if they're not tipped properly, and that's. But I usually inquire in restaurants that I go to find out if they pool their tips, how they, if they earn them individually, trying to understand that, and I do my best to make sure that I tip appropriately to make sure that the servers there are being compensated fairly. And if I get any negative feedback from them, I typically either don't patronize that restaurant or maybe even speak to management about it. It's because it is a struggle if you're serving tables. There's no question about that for many people. I also worked for the minimum wage when I was younger. I'm telling my age here, but I think it was $1.60 an hour when I was on minimum wage. And back then I couldn't afford to eat at McDonald's. It was too expensive for me, even though the burgers, I think, were 15 cents. Today, though, I'm feeling a little bit guilty because a Big Mac is one of my favorite sandwiches, and you're telling me that if I'm eating a Big Mac, I'm somehow being subsidized by the fact that the employees are being underpaid, and it never occurred to me before. Not that I want to pay more for the Big Mac, because the other night I think it was Big Mac and a Coke were was $4.50 or something, and it seemed fairly expensive. But it does hit home when I realize what you're saying there, that the fact that those employees are being paid less, that I'm probably paying less, and I don't know how that works out in terms of profits, but it is an interesting dynamic. On the HB1, can you tell me if it's going to be tied to CPI going forward, hopefully?
In fact, it isn't. It mirrors the federal bill, the federal minimum wage increase legislation in many respects, except for that one. I guess there's some decisions that have to be made as far as whether you can pass a bill or not, and I think that was one of the points of contention that didn't make it through, so to speak.
Isn't that just completely logical to get this all behind us in the future,
Yes.
to actually tie it to inflation so that we know that that situation you described going from 1965 to 2013, that our workers are not losing ground?
Well, exactly, and it would be our desire to have that so that we don't have to come back and workers can keep up with inflation.
Sure.
And just sorry to report that's actually not in House Bill 1.
Okay. And can you tell us what industries are typical for minimum wage? If there are, is there a particular industry?
Well, sure. I mean, your service and retail and, fast food and things that we're talking about all the time, Walmarts and things like that.
Okay.
Where people are paid, either at the minimum wage or they're close thereby.
Okay.
And then, with the average wages somewhere running about $8 or $7 an hour, depending on, what organization they work for.
I got it. And in your experience, Councilman Benson was talking about apprentice programs. The apprentice programs, apprentices do make less than the journeyman, and over time they build up their wages as a result of that.
Absolutely.
And that's something that I know that you have been a leader on for many years, as has Joe Wise. I think that's all I've got right now, Madam Chair. Thank you. Thanks, Bill. Thanks,
You're welcome.
Joe.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you.
Councilman David James.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for being here, Mr. Londrigan, and thanks for the service that you do for the working men and women of our state. A couple questions, if you don't mind. One is, sometimes I hear in the debate about minimum wage where people will say, well, we're only talking about teenagers here. Could you address that?
Yeah. So let me just go back, if I can find my little cheat sheet here with the stats on it here. It shows that that's not the case. 89% of the workforce that will be affected, they're at least 20 years old, at least. So that only leaves 11% below 20. And I just want to say something about that, as Councilman King brought up when he was a youngster working for minimum wage. You know, I don't see the logic of us saying we've got people coming into workforce and they're young folks, therefore they should be paid less. And one of the reasons why I say that is because the education and tuition costs in this country and in this state and this city have skyrocketed. So if we want folks to get an education, and not only has it skyrocketed, but the burden has been shifted more to the individuals, to the students themselves, to bear those costs. And if we want folks to get educated, you know, why aren't we going to pay them enough money for them to be able to afford the tuition that is, you know, going out of sight? So you know, that whole argument about, oh, these are just entry-level jobs and those young teenagers shouldn't be making that minimum wage, they shouldn't be making $10 an hour, I think it just is counterintuitive and doesn't help us advance ourselves as far as giving folks an opportunity to advance themselves like you all and like folks that want to get a good education. So,
Thank you. And this is another technical question, but do you happen to know the number of people in the state of Kentucky that would benefit from the increase in the minimum wage?
yes, I do.
Roughly.
Actually, I have it written on my notes here somewhere, and I know I had the nationwide number here, but ask your other question, and I'll
Okay.
see if I can't locate that here.
Okay.
There's a percentage number here that I have, which is 27%.
Okay.
Okay.
Of Kentuckians?
Kentucky workers.
Okay.
All right. So,
Thank you.
yes.
Okay.
And that would increase, according to these statistics, their you know, annual pay by over $2,300, which is a huge amount of money
Right.
for folks that are maybe making an average of $15,000 a year. And that's what we need to understand when we talk about this wage rate. You know, we ask folks, how do you raise a family? How do you put food on the table? And the answer is that folks are, you know, holding several jobs to try and make ends meet. You know, if you're making the minimum wage at 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, you're at about $15,000. That's not enough to raise a family on in this economy, and that's why this is so important.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to welcome Councilwoman Marilyn Parker. She just came in. Thank you. And I did have a comment I wanted to make on, which my assistant pointed out to me. If you worked at the Waffle House, third shift, nobody came in, you know, you make $2.13 an hour as far as tips, then you don't make anything. So without the minimum raise, you know, it could be really devastating to a person that worked third shift and is dependent on tips.
I was going to mention that, you know, that depending on the type of restaurant and the type of service and the hours, yeah, it has a major impact on whether folks are actually making a decent salary or not, or a decent wage.
And also, I want to just comment that I watched on the news this morning. They had a nice little segment on the minimum wage this morning, so I took a few notes. But I noticed that it said that when they raised it to $10.10 an hour, 16.5 million people would be getting a raise. 16.5 million people would get a raise. And right now, it would make 255,000 women. 255,000 women would get a raise with the minimum wage boost. So, you know, there's a lot of women, as they said before, that's out there working that is way below the poverty line because of men, of course, making a lot more money. So, and then this morning they also said that, of course, they're the ones that say that we should not have a raise in minimum wage. They said $9 an hour will result in 100,000 jobs being lost. $9 an hour would cause $100,000 being lost. 100,000 jobs being lost. I just don't understand how, because if you have more money, you're going to spend more money. So could you explain that, if you can?
Well, I can
explain.
you know, the argument from the side that says those jobs will be lost is that if we increase the wages of the workers, then the businesses are going to have to lay off individuals because they're not able to afford them any longer. Which, you know, flies in the face of all the economic analysis that's gone on for the last 15 or 20 years that says the job loss and the impact is minimal. that it doesn't result in huge numbers of job losses. There are other factors that come into play, too. When you pay people more money, you keep them around longer. Your training costs go down. So there's things that can, and plus we put more money in people's pockets, so they're generating more money to the economy and creating more economic activity, which increases job demand. So, you can argue this from both sides. One of the parts of this that is left out of the equation is that a lot of these low-wage workers are working for massive multinational corporations that have billions of dollars in profits each year, and we know which ones we're talking about. I'm not talking about millions of dollars in profits. I'm talking about billions of dollars in profits, and some of these corporations have employees, tens of thousands of them, that are paid so low that they're eligible and are on public assistance. At the same time, they're working for these corporations that are making billions of dollars. We need to put some balance back into the system here and give people a wage that's decent so that they can have a good standard of living, and not just have all the money accruing and flowing to the top 1% into large corporations that aren't necessarily, helping the general economy with the way they're paying.
Okay, Councilwoman Warrich, then Councilwoman Parker, then President King.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Quick question. I'm looking at House Bill 1, number 6. It says employees of retail stores, service industry, hotel, motel, and restaurants. It goes on and on. This doing business is less than $500,000 for 5 preceding years, exclusively of excise tax at the retail level. What I'm trying to get at, is there anything we can do if you make X amount of dollars and you're an employer? Is it anything we can do to make sure the employees are getting a living wage or a decent wage, and hours are not being cut where you can't get benefits?
Well, we can get them in a union and get them a contract and a collective bargaining agreement. How about that? And then they have a protection.
So let's say we have a typical family of 2-parent home, 2 children.
Yeah.
What would you really need to make to maintain maybe, say, 3 or 4 bedroom home? What kind of hourly wage do we need to have?
I have to look at some of the specific statistics on that, but it is much higher than $10.10. It's much higher than that, at least another $5 an hour.
This is what I'm saying, Madam Chair. By the time we get to the 10-10, 3 years from now, we'll be right back where we are today. And we ought to look at raising, if it's only here in Louisville, a minimum wage to a livable wage where families can be families and don't have to work 2 and 3 jobs. Thank you.
Councilwoman Parker.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I'd like to ask a question. In next meeting, they just texted me. I was up downstairs listening. Is the rebuttal, is there going to be other arguments?
Yes, we're going to have
Instead-
the ones that are against minimum wage raise on the next one. We did not want to do all of them at the same time.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm not necessarily against raising it. I just think that there are market forces in play now that when these previous studies were done, that didn't factor into those market studies as far as any negative impact that raising the minimum wage would have now. It is about a 30% increase. I know for some businesses that might not be doable, but I also think within 2016, when the healthcare law and mandate kicks in, both of those cumulatively on medium-sized businesses in particular could very well be very difficult and create situations where they would we have a negative impact and a negative effect. And I do realize that it's very difficult for a single mother, making $7 or $8 an hour to raise 2 kids on that alone. But, we do have huge safety nets in many different places and avenues and which is also why you really need, it always works better with a two-parent home instead of a single-family home. But those are concerns that I do have coming down the pike. I think there's market forces in many different avenues that also need to be considered, you know, when we're having the conversation about raising the minimum wage as far as impact on jobs. Thank you.
Thank you. President King.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bill, you were just talking about, I think you said $800 million was the amount of wages that we're talking about here that would be put into our economy. And I think you said $2,300 average per employee. And I think the question was asked how many people that would impact. I think, if my math is correct, it's about 350,000.
I think that is about right. And I think I have that written in here somewhere. That's,
all right. Well, you can
I
use
know
that
you
in
know
the
how to
future
do
if you'd
math.
like. Feel free to use that if you want.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councilman David James.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. So my last question, or comment, and our response from you, I guess. I've listened to the minimum wage debate for decades, and every time I hear the debate, I always hear the opposing side of the increase say that this is going to cost jobs, and there's going to be massive layoffs, and the world's going to end. In your experience, have you seen any of those things take place each time we raise the minimum wage?
Not at all. And we know we did pass the increase here in Kentucky several years ago, and there was no discernible job impact whatsoever. You know, there's always this back and forth between these two schools of thought, and the one side, you know, claims that as soon as we raise the minimum wage, it's going to result in massive layoffs, and you know, the economic analysis that's been done has shown that that has not been the case, and the experience has shown that too. You know, there'll be dislocations on jobs, and I think to one of the points is that in House Bill 1, they, you know, exempted businesses of less than $500,000 in revenue. That you know, so those folks didn't feel an undue burden. And the other thing is that, you know, this isn't going to be an immediate $10.10 increase. It's stepped each year at 95 cents an hour increments. And you know, we think that businesses should be able to plan and work around that because they're not getting hit with the immediate $3 an hour increase.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councilman Benson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bill?
Yes, sir.
If, for example, we raised the minimum wage to $10 an hour, and a company thought they can't make it anymore, they just can't make it, would it be feasible, since government is more efficient than business, that we could maybe buy the business so the people wouldn't lose their jobs, and we could teach them how they could make money where they didn't do a good job of managing the money and making the profit, that maybe we could show them how to do a better job. I mean, there's a lot of people who think that we could run General Motors or General Electric, or, you know, we together, we government, we've been anointed by God, and we know things that sometimes people don't. And we can make things better. We don't have to make a profit. We can always just raise taxes and make sure that things kind of work. And so we have the money, and then nobody's going to lose their jobs. And that way we can teach businesses how to do a job better.
I mean, that seems like a reasonable position to take. You know, the idea is to try and make sure that folks are, you know, not being hurt, whether it's business folks that are employing people or the individuals themselves. You know, the goal isn't to put people out of business. You know, the goal is to raise people up and give them more money in their pocket so that they can spend more money at that business. You know, you know, the argument shouldn't be, you know, a zero-sum game for one side or the other. You know, business provides jobs, and folks need to have those job opportunities. And you know, this measure that is before us here, this $10.10 raise, doesn't get us to what folks generally consider to be the proper minimum wage or the livable wage. It's an incremental increase that gets folks up to at least a modicum of you know, decent wage. You know, as Joe mentioned, if we actually index it to inflation from the time it was implemented, the actual minimum wage would be a whole lot higher.
Yeah. Well, one of the problems, you know, and you know, years ago we believed in competition. You know, the person who could do the job the best would maybe be ahead, you know, and then we came up with patents and make sure that if you come up with an idea, that you get to keep it for 10 years and try to market it. And after 10 years, anybody can make that product because of the patent, and gives them a somewhat chance to get ahead. But, I mean, there's a lot of things in our country is not really fair. You know, UK having 5 freshmen is the best. You know, should they only have 1 and maybe spread them out to other teams so other teams are fair? I mean, and when you think about unfairness, I mean, there's a lot of things that we as a government maybe, I don't know if we should, I mean, I don't want to, but maybe could make it somewhat fair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. And I agree with him on the UK U of L. I think they should give us 2 of their players. Okay. Thank you. Councilwoman Woolridge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is my final question, and I'm going to be very facetious. I basically would like to ask everybody in here, just the individuals, how many of us could live on a minimum wage? Raise your hand. Don't raise both hands, just raise one hand. Madam Chair, I don't see any hands. And let me just proceed with this just a little bit further. Everything, I have been on this Metro Council since the inception of merged government. There has been an increase in all services since I've been on this council. Each year, MSD sewer rates increase by a certain percent. The water increased by a certain percent. Our gas and electric, it increases by a certain percent. And it goes on and on. I don't think anyone, not just family people, just individuals, could live on a minimum wage of what we're being paid now. Not to mention gasoline for the car. I'm going to tell my age, too, because I can remember when gasoline for a car, if they had a gas war, it was 19 cents. It usually is 25, but if they had that gas war, it was 19. 19 cents. You might remember it, too. We're about the same age. And I just don't know why anybody, the bottom line of this is, I don't know why anybody could be against a fair living wage, minimum wage, at least the $10 and something an hour, because we just asked everybody could they do it, and I didn't see any hands. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for being here today.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Parker.
Yes, thank you. I'd just like to make another observational comments. And actually, I would support raising the minimum wage if we had a trade-off and we could get rid of the employer mandate for health care and restart all over with our health care mandate, which is just going to be awful for businesses and hospitals and insurance companies and families, and it just goes on and on down the line. But anyway, with minimum wage, now of course the standard of living in New York is a lot more expensive than here, but with minimum wage and all of the extra government help agencies that we have, they did a study, and for a single mother of 2 would have to make $21 an hour to find a job making $21 an hour to recoup the amount of government benefits that she would be allowed to take care of her family. That's pretty steep. So I think that with a reasonable wage, we're not looking at families that are just trying to survive off of $8 an hour. They're not surviving off of $8 an hour. They're getting food stamps, you know, subsidized housing, subsidized health care. There's all kinds of nonprofits that are helping these folks. And that's not to say that we shouldn't give a hand up. I just think that when you look at an issue, you can't look at that one issue just in a bubble. You have to look at it in the context of what else is happening in the business world. What's happening in the economy. You know, let's not do things, you know, that may, without foresight and forethought and looking at all of the external pressures and forces that may come to bear. We just went through a recession because we didn't have the forethought to look at what we were doing in the housing industry, and we collapsed that market and almost collapsed the banks. So I think that we need to proceed with reason and caution and good discussion on all of the angles and how it's going to affect jobs and business owners and the economy, so that we don't keep making the same mistakes over and over again. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I want to point out that, raising the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour, may seem like a lot to some people, but you have to realize they just cut food stamps and they've cut other programs. So the safety net is really not there as you think. How many of us in this room could do what Cory Booker in Newark, New Jersey did? Go out there and live on food stamps for a certain time. Could we do it? I think we could. We give us an opportunity to see how other people live. So when you look at the safety nets and the food stamps and the Section 8 and that type thing, I mean, they're not living like we live. And they just cut food stamps. They cut a lot of programs with Section 8. Do you realize how long that list is? That list is so long, it takes 2-3 years to get an apartment. So in the meantime, where are these people living? A lot of them live in cars. Out in the Newberry area, there's a lot of kids that are homeless, that live in different, the shelters and things, and then still come to school because they're on the waiting list. So that safety net's not there as you may think. So, and I just had to say that. But Councilman James, you're next.
Yes, ma'am. This will be my last comment to this. And I just wanted to say a few things and make sure I'm accurate in what I'm saying. First is an editorial piece on my behalf, and that is that, I thank God for the Affordable Health Care Act. I have the 14th poorest zip code in this country, where the people that live in my district, in a large part of my district, cannot afford to have health care, but now thank God they do. Number two is that I don't recognize that the minimum wage increases over the last decades have been mistakes. They have helped people and lifted people up. Secondly, would I be accurate in saying that when we have extremely large corporations that are paying some of our employees the mere minimum wage of $7.25 an hour, while they make profits of billions of dollars a year, that we, as government, provide services to those very same employees because they don't make enough money to even live any kind of life, and we subsidize that corporation while they take in those profits? Would that be accurate?
That's precisely accurate, and that's what we've seen, across the country with folks that millions of them on public assistance that are working for large corporations that are making large amounts of money, and the taxpayers, you and I, are subsidizing them because they're not paying enough money to give people a livable wage that they aren't eligible or need to have services, whether it's food stamps or any other types of public assistance. So that's an absolutely correct statement, and it really goes to the whole question of what we're doing in this country and how corporations have record profits and we have increasing poverty. We need to do something about that, and this is one step in the right direction.
Okay. Thank you very much.
And before I get you, Ms. Councilwoman Parker, I did forget to say, remember last Thursday we had a group that came before us about Build a Bed, because there's so many kids out there that don't have beds. They don't even have their own bed. And so they're asking us to be a part of that. And I just got an email saying there's 8 kids in my district that does not have a bed, and they're wanting me to participate and help build these beds. So the safety nets just aren't there, and I hate to say that, but people need more money to live. And with saying that, I'll give you the floor.
Thank you. My position is that we just need to balance economic forces to where we don't put more people in those terrible situations by loss of jobs. The Congressional Budget Office, their numbers were 500,000 jobs would be lost, and you said the numbers, the statistics you had were 300,000?
No, I didn't really indicate a specific job loss number. The 300,000 was the amount of people in Kentucky that would be lifted out of poverty by getting an increase in the minimum wage at $10.10. You know, the Congressional Budget Office came out with their estimate, and I can tell you, after looking at the other material and all the other studies, it certainly doesn't jive with what 600 economists, 7 Nobel laureates have said, that the increase in the minimum wage doesn't have a discernible impact on job loss. And as I said earlier, in Kentucky, when we raised the minimum wage, there was no reports whatsoever or any analysis or studies or anybody saying that we lost jobs in Kentucky when we raised the minimum wage up to $7.25.
What percent of it, I don't remember, what percent of increase was that when we raised it to $7.25?
I think it went from $5.50 to $7.25, but again, it was stair-stepped from 2006 all the way up to 2009. So, where's Jim King's?
Do you have any statistics on how many minimum wage earners are teenagers or illegals or any kind of information like that?
Well, the statistics we have, which, you know, verifiable, obviously, is that 89% of those potentially affected in Kentucky are at least 20 years old. So 11% below 20. You know, a lot of this full-time work, 57% women workers. So, you know, this has an impact on how people can provide for their families and put bread on the table for children. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
big numbers.
Well, I have noticed when I go into a restaurant or even a fast food, you're not seeing as many teenagers working those jobs because people are out of work because we've had such a slow recovery. They've had to take those kind of waitress jobs where our teenagers used to work those, and now they're out of work. So that's why it's just so important to look at the big picture and the total picture and make it all work together and not just do things in isolation.
Yeah. We have the last one to be Councilman David James, and then we have another committee coming right afterwards.
I just wanted a point of clarification. I wasn't sure what the category of a person is that's illegal. I'm not sure what that was referred to by the councilwoman. What is it in illegal?
I don't know. I guess we can let her explain what's illegal.
Well, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. You're not a documented citizen.
Okay.
You mean undocumented citizen as opposed to illegal? Would that be correct?
Well, we don't want to put anybody on the spot, so we're going to move on. We appreciate you guys coming, and we're going to invite the ones that are against the rise, minimum wage, raising minimum wage, and so in the next our next council meeting, so we're looking for ones that want to come before the council and speak, and but we just didn't want to have a lopsided informative information out here. We want to hear both sides.
Thank you very much.
So we appreciate so much for you guys being here.
Yeah, thanks a lot. You guys did good.
And with that being said, our meeting is adjourned.